Our names are Celeste and Mira. And first of all, we would like to thank you for taking the time to attend this interview with us.
So, in the future, do you personally think, as someone who's obviously very familiar with the political landscape of the UK, do you feel that the polarization and the political divide will increase when our generation starts to come into politics? Or do you think that it's going to become more united? And if so, that becoming united, is that up to our generation to bring that about?
I mean, none of us know. I hope your generation does do that, because I think the combination of populism and polarisation have done massive damage to our body politic. And I don't think we should assume that democracy just keeps repairing itself. It might not. So there's two things can happen. It can get worse or it can get better. And if it gets better, it won't be by going back to what it was before. It'll be going to something different and something new, which your generation, I think, has to create. But my sense is that your generation has got enough of a sense of that this is necessary to make it happen. But, you know, the short answer is none of us know. I was talking about the book I've just finished, But What Can I Do? And the purpose, when I started writing it, it's actually become something a bit different to what I started out writing. I started out writing something that was essentially saying, for all the good we might think we've done, our generation has left the world in a complete mess. So here's what I've learned, and I'm now going to hand over all that to my kids' generation and the generation following them to say, you do better. And take maybe some of the principles, say of strategy or campaigning or mindset and some of the things that you're going to need whatever era you're going through. But it's become something a bit different. It's become more an analysis of the mess that we're in, and then hopefully a set of tools, if you like, that the next generation can hopefully use. But I said in the talk that I think your generation has been given a pretty rum deal. Mm-hmm. But the reason I'm optimistic is, you know, for most of history, the world has advanced. There's been a feeling that the world is advancing. Lots of bad stuff happens, but it sort of moves in the right. It feels like it moves a lot of the time in the right direction. At the moment, it doesn't feel like that. So that's got to be arrested and moved in a different direction. And it's up to you guys.
What kind of problems do we face if we don't manage to engage our generation as much in politics?
I think if we get to a place where even a sizable minority, let alone a majority, start to think that politics has nothing to do with their lives and it doesn't make any difference who's in power, which is a ridiculous thing to say, but people say it all the time, as if it didn't make a difference that Trump beat Hillary Clinton or that Biden got rid of Trump. You know, it makes a massive difference. As if it didn't make a difference whether Britain had voted Leave or Remain. It makes a massive difference. So that cynicism's got to be countered. But the real worry I have, if people just disengage completely, is you're leaving the field wide open for the charlatans and the chancers who want to go in there, if you like, for the wrong reasons rather than the right reasons. Now, I think even with governments of the past that I've not necessarily agreed with, so if I looked at Margaret Thatcher when she was Prime Minister, that's when I was a journalist most of the time, you know, I disagreed with virtually everything she said and did, but I didn't see her as a complete charlatan. I didn't think she was doing it for reasons other than those that she was stating. I didn't feel that she was there just for herself. I felt she had a vision and values, and she saw politics as the route to put them into practice according to the people that she felt she represented. But what I see now literally are politicians who have very little by the way of values and principles. I mean, Johnson, I'm afraid, is the symbol of this in ways, Johnson and Trump, because, you know, both Trump was a Democrat, became a Republican because the party became the vehicle that he used then to advance his own interests. Johnson, you know, most of his life would have, if he'd have just been a member of the public, would probably have voted against Brexit. But when the moment came, his opportunism, he saw it in leading that campaign. And as a result, the country's in the mess that it's in. It's one of the reasons it's in the mess that it's in. So I think that's the risk, is that if the people, I was quite encouraged that although it was it was a minority in that room, but it was more than in most schools and colleges that people put their hands up and say they think about going into politics. But people have got to. If they don't, you leave it to the chancellors and the charlatans.
In today's world, there's obviously this 24/7 stream of news, and a lot of it comes out and is spread and goes viral before it can be verified. And as a journalist and as someone who worked in journalism a bit before all of this happened, how do journalists today compete and keep up with this constant stream of news that's being delivered to everyone all the time?
It's very hard. It's really hard. I don't have the answer. I guess look, even when you say how do journalists do that, what is a journalist anymore? You know, if that guy walking across the car park now suddenly took out a gun and shot those two women, okay? I'm not saying he's going to, look good he's walked by. But if he did, right? And we can get up, you've got a camera, I've got a phone, and we film that. Are we journalists?
Yes.
Are we? We're members of the public recording it, and we might send it to a media organisation, or we might tweet it, and we tweet the video, and then all the Swiss newspapers phone us up and say, can we use your Twitter film? And we say yes or no. If we say yes, are we journalists? Do they know? Do they know that that film's real? Do they know it's been filmed today? So that's really, really hard. Because and I think what's happened, and this happened before social media, this happened, I think, with the advent of 24/7 news. What that did was it created the pressure to be first, albeit wrong, was greater than the pressure to be late, but right. And what happened was that the process of news development, news gathering, became part of news itself. And you see that now, for example, you know, we're taking a break from that. We're getting reports coming in of an incident in Geneva. We will keep you up to date. We have no further details, but there's a major incident. Police have declared a major incident, okay? So people are suddenly interested in something going on there. What used to happen was that you heard that and then you checked what it was. So I think, and I think the other pressure that I think there is on mainstream journalists now, if I think back to when I started out as a journalist more than 40 years ago, and, you know, my day was like, get into the office, work on a couple of stories, maybe go out of the office a couple of times and see different things, write them up by about 5 o'clock, see them in the paper the next day. Maybe get a call at midnight saying the Sun or the Daily Express has got this angle, why didn't you have that? Is it true? Can you check it out? Update your story, whatever. Now, it's just a different... I really feel sorry for journalists starting out today. You've got to tweet, you've got to do blogs, you've got to do Facebook posts, you've got to do Instagram lives, you've got to do you know, stuff to camera, and that's that's including people who see themselves as writing journalists, and the broadcasters have to do the writing as well. So it's a totally different world. And I think the fake news thing is a real problem. And the big problem with it is that it's been worsened by the fact that politicians, Trump being the most obvious example, have used it to their own advantage. So when I talked about the 3 Ps, populism, polarisation and post-truth, those two are in part made possible by the third, by the post-truth.
Right. Mm-hmm. By
The politician telling you, no, that is not a car. You think that's a car, but it's not a car because I'm telling you that is actually a tree. Right? Now, that sounds absurd, but some of the things that they say, like Trump with his I had bigger crowds on the inauguration, or Putin saying that's not a Russian tank. They've been planted there by the CIA, whatever it might be. So post-truth has helped to drive populism and polarisation. So until that's dealt with, and I don't know the answer to that, because I think that you know, we quite often would like to sit around and say, well, the social media companies need to do more. Right, well, maybe they do, but what is it? What is the more that they do?
Yeah.
Does every single tweet, every single Facebook post, does it have to be checked and verified? Who does that? It's a nightmare.
What would you say was a positive aspect of the rise of social media?
Oh, I think there's lots. I think there's lots of positive aspects of social media. What I liked about it when it first came along was the fact that it gave everyone a platform if they wanted it. And if they had something interesting to say, they could develop that platform. And the other thing I think that did was to help to break down the kind of slightly oligarchical media systems that there were in most parts of the world, where a small number of major media owners were in a sense in control of the media narrative that was flowing into millions and millions of minds and homes around the world. So that I think is a good thing. If I think about my own use of social media, for example, I mean, I don't engage that much. I use social media a bit to follow the news. I use it to express my opinions. I use it to engage in debate with some people. I use it to sell books. I use it to sell tickets for events. I use it to post my tree of the day every day. I use it to promote the things that I believe in. Now, I think I do that better from my own perspective by not engaging that much. I'm stunned sometimes by some of the people I know who are kind of in my world, who literally will spend hours looking at what people are saying about them on social media. I honestly can't see the point. I think as long as you dip in and out and you're aware of a kind of a centre of gravity, and I can also see why it is a sort of bully's paradise, because it's just so easy to be anonymous, pick on people for who they are, what they look like, what they say, what they do, how they do it. But I think I think there's a debate about whether the positives and the negatives outweigh each other. And some days I change my mind about that, kind of according to what's going on. The whole Me Too thing couldn't have happened without social media.
Mm-hmm.
There's now a backlash, which is also happening because of social media. I listened today on the drive down to this thing on the radio about Amber Rudd and Johnny Depp. I had no idea this stuff was going on, but Amber Rudd is... Say that again. Amber Heard.
Yeah.
I listened on the way down, I listened to this thing, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and I had no idea this was going on. The French described them as masculinistes. These, I don't know how that translates, but kind of anti-women campaigners who have used this case for this sort of broader misogynist campaign, which they justify as a response to Me Too. Okay, now, the rights and wrongs, no idea. What the real motivations, no idea. But the point is, both of those things are phenomena of social media. I could argue that one is good and one is bad, but I think there's lots of good stuff happens on social media. You look at the way that charities fundraise now. You look at the way they operate. You look at what happened when, so for example, when lots of Ukrainian refugees were coming into the UK. A lot of the networks that developed were about people connecting on social media, then building networks which become real communities that help the people who are here and help the people who are looking after them. So I think there's lots of good in social media, but there's also a lot of bad.
Mm-hmm.
Has it ever been triggering or difficult for you to work with people struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts when you've gone through a similar experience?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. But I think I'm quite lucky in this, because one of the best decisions I ever made, for me personally, was to be completely open about my mental health, and on top of that, then to start campaigning about it, because I don't feel a lot of the stigma and the taboo that other people I know feel because they tell me about it. So if I get a very, very bad depression, for example, I know that I'm depressed, okay? And that's a horrible feeling and I don't enjoy it and I wish it wasn't happening. But of all the things that cause it, I don't necessarily know what they all are, but I don't think it's because I've been triggered by other people talking about it. On the contrary, I often feel better if I'm in that world talking about it with other people. I get a lot out of talking about it. I feel better in myself campaigning on it. So I get why whenever, for example, there's a TV show and it involves scenes involving suicide or suicidal ideation, and they'll say at the end of the programme, you know, if you've been struggling with issues like this, you can contact this number. I get why they do that, but I've never if anything, I feel it pushes me in the opposite direction.
Would you say that there's a lot of stigma surrounding mental health in general in the UK government or in the political landscape as a whole?
I think there is. Hold on, that's a good question. I think there's less than there was, but I think on the policy side of things and where it sits as a priority or non-priority within the government structures, I still think we're at a place where it's a bit of a luxury. It's seen as a bit of a luxury. It's not really taken with the seriousness that it should be. Now that is partly driven by taboo, because the taboo, what the taboo is saying is we shouldn't really be bothering with that when we could be bothering with this, because this is easier, because people get this, they understand this. But what I say to people about this will amaze people of your generation, right? But when I was growing up, there was a taboo around cancer, okay? People didn't talk openly about cancer. The press used to call it the big C. They always know if there tends to be a taboo if the language that's given to it is something other than what it actually is, which is why we have euphemisms for all sorts of things. And there are lots of euphemisms for mental health and mental illness. And so the stigma and the taboo having gone from cancer, that has led to governments being much less able, even if they were willing, to kind of take it less seriously. It makes it easier for charities to raise money. I've worked with blood cancer charities, and you know, if you put a pretty blonde girl with a nice smile on the front of a leaflet and say you're raising money for leukemia, you've got an open door. If you're trying to raise money for, you know, schizophrenia treatments or whatever it might be, it's not so easy. And I think that's part of the taboo. So I think it's improved. I think the taboo has lessened. I think we're in a better place in terms of understanding the debate around mental health, but I don't think it's been matched by the improvement in services.
How do you distinguish between lying, spinning the truth, and alternative facts? And is the line often blurred in the media?
Well, I think an alternative fact is a lie, isn't it? If you've got a fact, 2 + 2 is 4. Fact. 2 + 2 is 5 is an alternative fact. It's not true. How can you blur that? You can't blur that. What you can blur is right, so there's a load of cars out there, and we know that pollution is a real problem. Okay? If you're a car company, you would prefer that the people down here think that the pollution is being caused by that aeroplane rather than that car. So the airline is going to emphasise them, and they're going to emphasise the airline, right? That's kind of blurring. And the other thing that the sort of classic, and people hate it when they see this, but the sort of classic politician thing where you say, well, that's very interesting, but that's not the question. At which point the journalist should always say, yeah, but that's the question I just asked you. Can you answer it, right? But so what you're doing, you're not lying, you're avoiding. I actually think you'd be surprised how few politicians actually outright lie on a consistent basis. It's actually quite few. Most people don't like lying. But blurring, I think, is inevitable. And it's inevitable, for example, in our system in the UK, because our system of government is founded on the principle of collective responsibility. So you have a debate and then you agree a position and then you all support that position. So let's say we've been a cabinet, the three of us, and we've had a discussion and we've disagreed, but then we had a vote and it was 2-1, right? And our position, your position won, and then I go out and do an interview about it, and they say, and the interviewer says, well, we're hearing there was a very, very vigorous dispute about this. Is that true? And I could say, well, no, because we've resolved it and we've decided this is the position, and I support that wholeheartedly. Now, is that a lie?
No.
Yeah, it's blurry.
Yeah.
It's blurring. But it's not an alternative fact.
So would you say the main aspect of spinning the truth is simply using a different perspective?
I don't really know what spin means anymore. It's just become kind of one of those words that gets used about anything that anybody communicates. I would say, what's a good recent example of something that... So Putin invades Ukraine and calls it a special military operation.
Right.
Well, it is a special military operation. But it's also an invasion, and it's a war. But he doesn't want to call it an invasion, he wants to call it a special military operation. I guess that's a blur, that's an alternative fact, but it's also true. It is a special military operation.
Mm-hmm.
But it happens to be a special military operation that he doesn't want to call it by the name of invasion. So I think that's a halfway house between the alternative fact and the outright lie. But I think other examples would be where there are lots of situations where people, not just in politics, but you get this in sport the whole time. You see these managers being interviewed. You know, they're interviewed before a match. You've dropped so and so, and you've replaced them so and so. What's the thinking behind that? And they'll say, "Oh, well, it's a tactical change. You know, it's just a slight tactical repositioning." When the truth might be that the player that he's just dropped was found in his hotel room at midnight doing things that he shouldn't be doing. But he's not going to say that. Because now, until the media find out that's the real reason, and then what he'll say is, oh, well, it's an internal matter, we're dealing with it internally. He's not lying. He didn't lie when he said it was a tactical change. It was a tactical change. It's just that it was a tactical change forced on him by a completely different set of circumstances which he had no intention of putting into the public domain. So I would say I guess you could say that's spin. Where the thing spin comes from in my mind is from cricket. Because when you play cricket, you spin the ball. You're trying to deceive the batsman from where you think the ball's going to go. But I'll tell you where the actual word came from. The first known use of spin was in an American presidential debate way back, way back, when you had the debates live on TV, but this was back in the black and white days, and the candidates went off to their rooms, and then the media came out, and there was something called Spin Alley. And on that side, lined up before the debate started, people were going to say the Democrat guy had won, and on that side, people were going to say the Republican guy had won. And it was called Spin Alley, because whatever happened, they were going to say that their guy won. So that's where the phrase started to enter the language. And then I added in this sort of cricket element. So, but I think it's overdone.
For one last question, did you really coin the term the People's Princess?
I know this is going to sound really, really, really weird, but I honestly don't know the answer to that. Now, does that sound weird?
A little.
Why does that sound weird? Tell me why that sounds weird.
Well, I feel like you'd remember if you wrote it.
Why?
I don't know, because it's such a commonly used phrase now. It's sort of an iconic thing people say when they talk about it.
Right, but did anybody think that at the time?
I suppose maybe not.
That's the reason why so I keep a diary, okay? The only line in my diary on that day that Diana died that refers to it was in one of the many phone calls I had with Tony Blair through the night. So it's in the middle of the night, you're having these emergency phone calls with all sorts of different people. It's really busy, the phones are going crazy. And there's one line and it says, "We agreed it was okay to call her the People's Princess."